Good afternoon. Sorry for breaking your eardrums just now. I have the distinct pleasure now for the second time today to introduce a keynote. Dr. Zohar Raviv is a renowned speaker and educator throughout the world. He is the president of educational strategy for Taglit Birthright Israel, as well as scholar in residence for both the ICE Center for Israel Education and for Momentum Unlimited. Anyone who has heard Zohar knows that they're in for a treat because he shares great depth of understanding of Israel and the Jewish situation. We're very, very fortunate to have Dr. Raviv with us and sharing with us his wisdom. Today's topic is between sight and vision toward a strategic blueprint for Jewish and Israel education in this era. With no further ado,
good afternoon. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here in Australia for the fourth time in my career. And I first of all must share with you how impressed and even touched I was by some of the sessions that I've heard so far today. Invigorated by a level of optimism that I see here, and incredibly impressed by the level of commitment that we all share for Israel, for Judaism, for Zionism, and for the betterment of the Jewish condition throughout our future. I would like to divide this presentation into two parts. The first will be 5 very brief points that I want to make actually by way of preface, and then 6 points that I would like to share vis-a-vis what I believe should be a strategic blueprint for the Jewish people in terms of Jewish and Israel education in the modern era, and not just as a post-October 7th notion. And the purpose of this presentation is to attempt and give all of us some sort of a shared language, a conceptual canopy by which we can wrestle with some of the foundational questions that we deal with as a people and as educators in today's day and age. So let me start off by way of preface to say that first and foremost, I believe that we live today in a revolutionary moment in the evolution of the Jewish people. And by a revolutionary moment in the evolution of the Jewish people, I mean that the evolution of the Jewish people does not stop, but we are now at the forefront of a moment of awareness and a moment of kavanah, of what in Judaism is known as shat ratzon, a moment of willingness among Jews that is unprecedented in modern Jewish history. And that in and of itself should raise for us a great call for action as educators and as people who work on behalf of the Jewish community in charting a path for our envisioned trajectory as a people. The second point I want to make is that while our shared past is a fact, our shared history is a choice. And the mandate of Jewish and Israel education in that respect is to work together in order to make sure that those with whom we come into contact make the right choice. And the right choice here being people who wish to remain engaged, involved, and seek meaning in Jewish life, meaning in relevance, because that choice in today's era should not be taken for granted. In order to do that, we need to become trailblazers, leaders. And one of the words that I always treat very suspiciously is the word leadership, which has been thrown around the Jewish world and has been bastardized by many, many organizations who want to attract, and so they throw in the word leadership without much thought into its meaning. So I would like to share with you what is my take on leadership and how it pertains to what we're doing here. For me, leadership, and I'm not original at that, I'm actually borrowing from the prophets of Israel. Leadership is the ability, our ability, at the end of the day, to turn the world in which we live into a world in which we believe. And our ability to negotiate between what we see and what we want to see, which I will return to in a minute, is basically the landscape of leadership. And in that respect, you cannot be a leader without the innate optimism which must govern our approach. Leadership and despair do not go hand in hand. They simply do not go hand in hand. And when I talk about leadership in this context, I must tell you that the only thing that I identify greater than the calamity that has befallen us since October 7th is the educational and the identity formation opportunity that rises in its wake vis-a-vis the awareness of Jews as to the meaning of being Jewish and to awareness of Jews for the importance of being Jewish, many of whom, by the way, against their better judgment or against their conscious will. And the last point, by way of preface, is that we are all in this together. This is our call. This is our charge. And if you remember one thing, remember this. One day in the future, all of us are going to become part of our people's past. That's a biological fact. And the question of what kind of a past we want to become to our future is a question for the present. We will be judged in the future based on the actions that we take in the present. So we need to think very carefully how we want to proceed from this point on. These are my points by way of preface, and now I want to address the framework of what I call a strategic blueprint. There is no doubt that the post-October 7th era has created a level of angst and anguish of unprecedented proportions for Jews in the modern era. For the younger ones among us, this is the greatest calamity that we even remember. At the same time, if we take everything I said up to this point and we exercise the responsibility of leadership and the burden of optimism, my first point is that we need, as a people and as leaders, to make a very clear distinction between what I call sight and vision. Sight, S-I-G-H-T, and vision. Because the sight or the sights around us right now are terribly difficult. We're not only talking about October 7th. I refuse to talk about only October 7th, but rather about October 7th in Israel and October 8th in the rest of the world. And the sights around us are horrendous. There's no way of sugarcoating it. The things I had witnessed in Israel, and we have some people who witnessed it 10 times more than I did, are horrendous. And I've seen some shit in my life. They're horrendous. But we cannot allow to turn the sight into the landscape which edifies our approach to Jewish education and to Jewish identity. Sights, by definition, elicit a reaction. And the reaction, by definition, is tactical. And if you look at the response of the Jewish world in light of October 7th and October 8th, it's been tremendous in terms of the reaction of the Jewish world to the atrocities that we had all witnessed. But those are tactical measures. And God bless each and every one of you for the work that you've been doing. But those are tactical measures. A sight is about reaction. A vision is about proaction. And a vision is not tactical, but strategic. So whereas sights elicit a reaction that aims to extinguish fires, a vision is about planting trees. Because if we're only busy extinguishing fires, we will end up with a scorched land. So the first distinction we need to make is to be wholly reactive and responsive to the sights around us right now, But we must never forget to put equal, if not even greater, attention to the call to be strategic, visionary, and proactive in the engagement of Jewish and Israel education. The second point I want to make is a point that some of you may have heard before in other venues where I spoke around the world. And it's probably one of the most seminal points that I've been trying to advocate for the better part of the last 20 years. And that is the work towards proactive rather than reactive identity formation processes, which namely identify the alarming disparity, in my opinion, between our story as Jews and our narrative as Jews. And here I want to ask you to indulge me for a few minutes while I unpack this statement. I believe that our story as Jews is a great story. By the way, I said great, I didn't say perfect. There are no perfect stories in the human arena. The last time I checked, every country on earth has a few skeletons in its own national closet. But it is a great story. I believe that the story of the Jewish people is a story of a people who for thousands of years demonstrate an opposite relationship between numbers and impact. I believe that the story of the Jewish people is a story of a people who made commitment to memory an art form. I believe that the story of the Jewish people is a story without which, and I don't think it's a hyperbole, we couldn't even imagine Western society as we know it today. And the thing I'm proud of the most in being Jewish is to belong to a people who truly wish to turn the world in which we live into a world in which we believe as part of the backbone of their value system. We belong to a people who celebrate representatives throughout the ages who made a lasting impact on almost every imaginable field of human interest. And by the way, the same goes for the relatively young state of Israel, where you put all the politics aside and you put all the ranting aside and all the problems aside and all the screams and shouting aside, and you look at it for a little bit from afar and you take a deep breath and you look at what the state of Israel has achieved in 76 years of existence, it is truly mind-boggling. We have a great story. The story of the Jewish people is a story of a people committed to curiosity, committed to the betterment of their own community and the rest of the world. It is a story of a people committed to life, to progress, to education, to knowledge. It is the story of the ever-living people. Alas, our narrative, and that is the way we opted to tell our own story, is almost exactly the opposite of our story. For hundreds of years, the Jewish people have opted to narrate our story not as the story of the ever-living people, but as the story of the ever-dying people. Our narrative is a narrative that is still deeply indebted to a rhetoric of crisis, anti-Semitism, victimhood, bloodshed, war, Holocaust. And I want to be very clear about what I'm saying here. I'm not downplaying, God forbid, any of the calamities that have befallen our people throughout history. What I am saying, however, is that those calamities do not define me as a Jew. A few years ago, I met Naftali Bennett. At that point, he was the Minister of Education for Israel. I think it was on the third out of 5 governments. It was the third. He was the minister for like 24 minutes or something like that. And he invited me and a few other colleagues to consult him on some reforms that he wanted to make. He's a smart man. At the end of that conversation in Jerusalem, I had some alone time with him and I said, Mr. Bennett, I want to ask you something and please don't take it personally, but I'm asking you because you are the Minister of Education. If it was someone else, I would ask that person. I said, yeah, what do you want to ask? I said, I want you to explain to me why, as an Israeli and a Jew, this is my timeline of Israel. And I wrote on the blackboard, 1947, 1948, 1956, 1967, 1973, 1982, 1991. You see where I'm going with this? And he looked at me and said, that's our story. I said, no, that's not our story. These are interruptions to our story. My friends, if you take anything from what I'm saying to you today, please take the following sentence. There's a huge difference between remembering and commemorating our tragedies, on the one hand, which is important and vital, and between turning our tragedies into the founding blocks of our identity as Jews. We cannot sustain a healthy Jewish body on a perpetual diet of tragedies. It won't work. But more offensive than that is the fact that this is not our story. And I ask myself all the time, because I'm fully aware of the awesome gravitational pull of tragedy to elicit identity, while at the same time being fully aware that establishing identity on tragedy, with all due respect, may be very tempting, but it's not education, it's manipulation. At the end of the day, Judaism should be celebrated, not defended. At the end of the day, we should forge a Jewish identity that is based on the inner mechanisms of Jewish life, rather than based on external threats to Jewish living. We should focus on the reasons to be Jewish, rather than the reasons to defend Judaism. And I'm fully aware of the fact that what I can do emotionally in 5 minutes in Auschwitz will take me a full year in a classroom. But that's manipulation, if not done properly in appropriate context, and if not giving our students the reason to be Jewish. So I want to be very clear. I was a Jew on October 6th, and I remained a Jew on October 8th. I'm not a Jew because of October 7th. I'm a Jew despite of October 7th. We should work diligently and together, ladies and gentlemen, to once and for all change the narrative of the Jewish people so it adequately corresponds with the story of the Jewish people. We are the ever-living people, not what Simon Ravidovich called in the 60s of the past century, the ever-dying people. That's not my story. A lot of us know about 1492 and 1497, the expulsions from Spain and Portugal respectively. How many of us truly know about 350 preceding years of Jewish glory, creativity, art, culture, texts, literature? We know nothing about those, but we know about the expulsion. We know a lot about the way 6 million Jews died. We don't know much about the way 6 million Jews lived. We usher in people into meeting our story through the way we die, rather than through the way we live. And that must stop. That's point number 2. Point number 3, as we try to move our narrative from that of oi to that of joy, is understanding who is the audience that we try to address in this day and age. And we live in an era which I call the era of an era which is richly informed ignorance. People who have access to great information but know nothing as a result. People who think they know, instead of know they think. We live in an era of great arrogance, where the purpose of education is to introduce the humility that is part and parcel of gaining wisdom and knowledge. But what we need to understand about those that we've been mandated to cater to work with, And that's, by the way, a very positive point I'm making. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind, and this is backed by research as well, that the overwhelming majority of young Jews worldwide, including Australia, don't take any part whatsoever in the shameful, despicable, anti-Israel, Jew-hating, anti-Zionist rhetoric that runs rampant on social media and other venues. They don't. However, and this is what's important for us to understand as people who have a vision for Jewish education, they constitute what I call a silent majority that increasingly feels as a silenced minority. And when a silent majority feels like a silenced minority, it leaves a vacuum that invites dangerous things to happen. So we as a community of educators worldwide need to think about this strategically on two levels that I offer here by way of suggestion. Number one, all of us need to ask ourselves together, what is it that we can do on all fronts to raise the awareness of our young adults, to raise their awareness to the fact that they are actually a majority and not a minority? And by extension, what can we do and what kind of resources, pedagogy, support, network can we give them as a community to transform them from a silent majority to a vocal one? And when I say a vocal majority, by the way, I want to be very clear. I'm not talking about a majority of young Jewish adults who flaunt Israeli flags and chant Hatikva in multiple languages. That's not the goal here. The goal here is for a majority that claims its inherent right to explore Israel, Judaism, and Zionism in a responsible, intelligent, meaningful, critical manner as they deserve, in a climate that does not allow that to happen anymore. That's our responsibility, to furnish them with an alternative landscape for meaningful dialogues about what it means to be a Jew, what it means to be a Zionist, and what it means to have a connection with Israel in today's day and age. The next point I want to make is about the way we narrate both Israel and Zionism. And these are hard, difficult questions for which I would like to offer a number of concepts. I argue that the narrative of Israel and the narrative of Zionism have also been kidnapped from us, but not only kidnapped, neglected by us for many, many, many years. And we need to reaffirm a broader context of Israel and a broader context of Zionism as part and parcel of our narrative and educational efforts. When it comes to Israel, I would encourage each and every one of you, if you haven't done so, to take a very close and hard look at Israel's Declaration of Independence. A document which is not only hosting a language which should be critically examined, but also a document that has a lot of problems in it, a lot of open questions. But no matter how you look at it, it is a tremendous landscape for educational work when it comes to Jewish identity and the place of Israel in the accumulated imagination of the Jewish people throughout history. And I would like, with your permission, to take a number of points that rise from this document and are relevant to our discussion today. Point number one is that the state of Israel was established as the homeland of the Jewish people, and not as the homeland of the Jewish people who live in Israel. In other words, that the land of Israel is our homeland, irrespective of the lands which are our home. Live wherever you want, and God bless you for it. There's no contradiction or contention here. Live wherever you want. But we still, around the Seder table, we say Leshana Haba B'Yerushalayim, and we don't say Leshana Haba in Melbourne. And I have nothing against Melbourne. So we need to, first of all, address the question of what it means to have a homeland as part and parcel of who we are. and also assume the great responsibility and honor of being part of those who created that homeland. One of the things that I tell Israelis all the time, is that Israel would not have been established, let alone exist, without the uninterrupted and rigorous effort of world Jewry. So Israel is the accumulated result of the accumulated effort of world Jewry and of Israeli Jewry, and should be investigated as such. Number two, Israel was established as a state of ideals and not an ideal state. And in today's day and age, fewer and fewer people are able to make the distinction. Israel tries to celebrate certain ideals that are part and parcel of who we are as a Jewish homeland. It never aspired to be an ideal state. It never claimed to be an ideal state. And it is sure as hell not free of mistakes, problems, and many other issues that are part and parcel of any other country on earth. In other words, the false aspiration that some people put on Israel to be above and beyond everything else is sometimes doing us a disservice, because we don't understand that ideal states don't exist. The only state I know in the world that calls itself an ideal state, anyone wants to take a guess? Exactly. Whose ruler, by the way, I don't know if you know, invented the color green. You're welcome to check it out. So we're talking about a state of ideals and not an ideal state, a distinction that invites us and our participants to critically examine those ideals and see whether they are being fulfilled or not in a responsible, meaningful way. The third point that we should all be aware of, I talked about in another session this morning, about the fact that we deal in a world, we deal with people who are surfers without a diving license. People surf and don't dive anymore. And when you live in a world of surfers without a diving license, you have to acknowledge that there is a huge disparity between the multi-layered reality of Israel on the one hand, and the oftentimes single-layered perception of Israel on the other hand. For Jewish and Israel education to prosper, Jewish and Israel educators need to intentionally, perpetually, and consistently aim to bridge the gap between the multi-layered existence of Israel, which functions on many, many fields, and that ties to some of the things that Claire Goldwater spoke about this morning when she showed different aspects of Jewish and Israel experiences, some of whom are not coming to the awareness of our participants, and the single-dimensional perception of Israel, which usually revolves around Israeli geopolitics and warfare. And our ability to add extra dimensions of appreciations of Israel beyond the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a strategic need that requires everybody's enlistment and integrated into the curriculum, the pedagogy, and the very infrastructure of Israel and Jewish institutions in Australia and any other part of the world. And the last point regarding Israel is that one cannot intelligently, meaningfully, and thoroughly talk about the state of Israel without having the necessary context of the concept of the land of Israel. And I want to be very clear on that. Without the idea of the land of Israel, irrespective of religious belief or affiliation, I'm talking from the standpoint of a narrative. Without the idea of the land of Israel and the thousands of years of connection between the people of Israel and that land, the state of Israel has no leg to stand on. As simple as that. It has no raison d'etre. This is why Israel's declaration of independence of the state of Israel, those of you who read it know that it starts with the words, in the land of Israel, Be'eretz Yisrael Kam Ha'am HaYehudi. We cannot discuss the state of Israel without understanding the land of Israel. And that has nothing to do with religious affiliation or even belief. It has to do from a standpoint of historical and narrative context for our discussion. The same goes for the big Z word, Zionism, which became a concept non grata in many, many circles. And here again, in my opinion, needs to be reaffirmed, reintroduced, and re-narrated, first of all for ourselves, and then for those with whom we come into contact. And just like the state of Israel cannot be fully discussed without understanding the concept of the land of Israel, I argue that Zionism, the term Zionism, cannot be intelligently discussed without making a clear distinction between the Zionist movement, or Zionism as a political movement that emerged in the last quarter of the 19th century, and Zionism as an ancient Jewish value statement. I believe, and I want to be very, very honest about this, that the state of Israel has done a miserable job throughout the years with the concept of Zionism. The reason is because it treats Zionism primarily, if not exclusively, as a political movement who, by the way, is reactive in its raison d'etre. In other words, they try to respond to certain things that happened in Europe and other parts of the world and decided that the Jewish people need a homeland. No, that's not true. And actually, historically, it's not only erroneous, it's a major mistake to present Zionism as such. The first Zionist, and again, that has nothing to do with religious affiliation or belief. The first Zionist is not Herzl, with all due respect to Herzl. The first Zionists are Abraham and Sarah. Lech lecha me'artzecha u'mimolotecha u'mibet avicha el haaretz asher areka is the first Zionist verse in the Torah. Moses, who was a terrible tour guide, he was a Zionist nonetheless. He was walking in a particular direction. Ezra and Nehemiah, when they return from the Babylonian exile, it's called the return to Zion, Shivat Zion. When Ezekiel laments, by the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept, remembering Zion, he's a Zionist. The same goes with Judah Halevi in Spain, thousands of years later. My heart is in the east, v'anochi befa'atei ma'arav, and I'm in the farthest reaches of the west. He's a Zionist. When a groom crushes a cup under the chuppah, it's a Zionist act. And when you build a new synagogue, where one of its walls faces Jerusalem, not the east, Jerusalem, that's Zionist architecture. We have robbed our many generations from a fully contextualized understanding of Zionism. Zionism is not an addition to Jewish identity. It's inherent to Jewish identity. For me to say that I'm a Jew, a non-Zionist, it's like for me saying I'm a human, but non-breathing. It's as ridiculous. So we need to reintroduce such concepts in order for our young ones, again, not to agree with them, but at least to lay the grounds for an intelligent discussion about what we're talking. If I had it my way, in the Heichal HaAtzmaut, in the Hall of Independence in Tel Aviv, in Rothschild Avenue, where Ben Gurion, you remember, declared the establishment of Israel, Herzl would not be in the center. He would be at the end of a long wall that started with Abraham. The same goes for Har Herzl in Jerusalem and for Merkaz Herzl in Jerusalem, that speaks about Zionism, but should speak about Zionism as a movement and understand Herzl as a continuation of a story that started 4,000 years before Herzl. The State of Israel is not a colonial enterprise, it's a Renaissance project. And to understand it, you need context. And the last point I want to make, which is a hard one because it's a sensitive one, and I know that it affects your community. I heard you speak about it today. And it's something that lies very heavily in the minds and hearts of Jews all over the world. And that is, of course, the question of anti-Semitism. While I'm fully cognizant of the fact that anti-Semitism has risen its ugly head in many, many shapes and forms in the last few years, definitely after October 7th, I want to make, again, a very clear statement about the interface between anti-Semitism and Jewish and Israel education, or better yet, Jewish education. Fighting anti-Semitism should never be a goal in education. It should always be an outcome. And what's the difference? We should invest in solid, meaningful, positively sought after, resilient, proudful Jewish education and Jewish identity processes. That should be our goal. And I strongly believe that if we succeed in doing that and focusing on that, one of the outcomes would be is that people will fight anti-Semites when they meet them because they now have a raison d'etre for being Jewish. There's a huge difference between doing that and sanctifying anti-Semitism and fighting anti-Semitism as a goal for Jewish education. I will never, ever participate in an endeavor that trains our young generation to fight for Judaism, because that's not the purpose of being Jewish. We should do whatever we can to teach them to celebrate Jewish life, and if needs be, they will defend it. And I want to give you a concrete example of what I just said, which happened years ago. Years ago, I was asked by Yad Vashem, you know Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, to go incognito to Poland and write them a report about the way some of their guides are leading in Auschwitz and Majdanek and Treblinka and other parts, to give them an educational report, which I did. In one of those days, I was in Majdanek. How many of you, by the way, have been to Majdanek in Lublin? How many of you? So those of you who've been know what the pile of ashes, the mountain of ashes in Majdanek. 6 or 8 tons of human ashes there, mostly Jews. You cannot stay apathetic to such a horrendous sight of carnage. And there's a group there of Israeli young adults. They're 17 years old, many of whom wrapped with Israeli flags, and a guide. And a guide stands with his back to this pile of ashes, and he gives a heartfelt speech, which left no eye dry in his audience. I was standing, as I was just listening. He really spoke from the bottom of his heart. He was passionate. He was committed. I have nothing bad to say about this guy. He was really talking. His end remark, and again, he was doing it for all the right reasons. His end remark was, he pointed at this pile of ashes and he said, and if you remember anything, remember this. You need to remain Jews for their sake, because they can't. Now, no eye was left dry in the audience. My heart sank, because that was manipulation. That was not education. So at the end of this speech, I went to one of the young men, who was in the audience. He was an Israeli, he was wrapped with an Israeli flag. I introduced myself. I didn't tell him, of course, that I'm an inspector. I just said I'm an Israeli who is here now, and I heard your guide's speech. And I want to ask you, because I'm interested, what was the impact of that? What did you take out from? He looked at me, he was angry. I remember his eyes, he was angry. I can understand. And he says to me, and I'm going to say it in Hebrew, and pardon my language, I'm quoting him, and then I'll translate to those who don't speak Hebrew. He says the following thing. He looks at me, he says, שהבן זונה הבא, שינסה לעשות את זה לעם שלי, למדינה שלי וליהדות שלי, יצטרך לעבור אותי קודם. Translation, that the next son of a bitch who tries to do this to my people, to my Judaism, and to my country will have to go through me first. Okay, I look at him and say, you know what? Now they have to go through me also. I'm right there, shoulder by shoulder. But now, with your permission, one more question, and then I'll let you go. He said, yes. Can you explain to me what is exactly that Judaism that you're defending so hard? Because, if we're going to die for it, I want to know what I'm defending. So just, it seems a reasonable request to know what I'm going to die for. He couldn't answer. He looked at me and he couldn't even comprehend the question. And I looked at him and said, what is the Judaism that you are so set to defend? He couldn't answer. Guys, we're oftentimes building a Jewish identity that is very rough on the edges, but utterly vacant at the interior. It won't work. It won't work. We need to build from the inside out. We need to invest in meaning making. We need to ask ourselves, what are the pedagogies that we use in order to answer the question, why be Jewish, and not only how to be Jewish? And one of the results of that process will be people who will stand up and defend Judaism, not because they were trained to do it, is because they're internally motivated to continue celebrating being Jews, because that's what gives them meaning in life. That has always been Judaism. Always. So I believe that if we look at this protocol and vision as proactive educators, as people who understand that while the gravitational pull of tragedy is truly awesome, it can equally be devastating from an identity formation standpoint, we should commit ourselves to a healthy balance between remembering our tragedies on the one hand, yet focusing our attention to the reasons that we are part of a people who are committed to the notion of lechaim, to life, and not lehisardut, to survival. Toda rabba.
That was incredible. It was one. I learnt a new term today from Yoni Bookman, actually. Goosebumps with complexity. That was goosebumps with complexity. It was profound, it was insightful, it was deeply meaningful, and I don't think you left a single mind or heart unmoved in this room. So thank you so much, Zohar. It's been an incredible first day. I know we've been stimulated, we've formed new relationships, we've covered a huge amount of ground. And Zohar, to your point, when we talk about why be Jewish, I think the fact that we are custodians of this incredible tradition of investing in education, investing in connecting past, present, future, and really being able to answer the difficult questions. Why be Jewish? How do we connect this ancient value of Zionism to the people we are today is profoundly important. You spoke about the value of being able to envision and build the world that we believe in. And this whole conference started with one man's vision in 1998. He's the founder of this conference, and he's the man who thought there would be value in bringing together Jewish educators from across Australia, New Zealand, and in fact the world to discuss the big meaningful issues, the complex issues, the ones that don't have quick answers, the ones that require us to dive deeper and look again. So Ron, I know you flew all the way down with your family to be with us today as the founder and the visionary leader who created this conference. We've got a small token to say thank you, which is a Chanukiah that is personally inscribed to you from the Zionist Federation. And it's a small gift that really is a symbol of so much that you have given to our community here in Australia, to the state of Israel, and of course to our Jewish educators across the world. So if I can invite you up. Thank you.